Good day everyone, I am Blessy Bondok from BPED 2D and this is my activity 1 in Unit 5. In this video, I'm going to answer the following questions. First is, explain the concept of relative timing. How might practitioners use this concept to determine differences between classes of movements? And how might the relative timing structure of dart throwing differ from that putting the shot? Think of the difference in terms of the relative speeds of the wrist, lower arm, and upper arm in the two movements. Relative timing. This is a measure of temporal structure of a movement in which the ratios among the durations of various movement features are used to define the temporal pattern. In short, relative timing is a time pattern of a movement segment relative to overall. The fundamental timing structure or rhythm of a movement pattern is measured by the ratios among the durations of various movement features. And this rhythm remains the same even though people adjust the flexible surface features of the pattern. The practitioners use the principle of relative timing to determine the difference between class movement. The example is the activity like throwing might be thought of as a class of movements containing numerous variations of action, like throwing object that is different in size and weight and different in distance. General Motor Program, the GMP of Generalized Motor Program is thought to evolve over time and serve as the foundation for creating movement sequences within a class of movements that share invariant features like sequence order, relative force, and relative timing. Trained observers like judges can detect the invariants relatively easily, allowing them to classify movement according to its relative timing structure rather quickly. Although general ratio program theory postulates that relative timing is invariant within class of movements like walking, it assumes that relative timing differs from one class of movements to another. Throwing darts is limited by accuracy in the timing of the release. When person is the only goal, as in throwing darts, one could therefore expect people to throw in a way that reduces sensitivity, imprecision, in timing. This shows that subjects do not do so but throw in a way that reduces the sensitivity for speed errors. Instead, they even appear to vary the timing of release to compensate for the errors in the hand's movement. Thus, timing does not appear to be the limiting factor. While in putting a shot, it requires strength. That's why they are different in terms of strength and accuracy. Shot putters exerted a great force in thrust, critical forces, and torques exerted in thrusting motion. In thrust, shot putters underwent extremely great compressive and anterior forces on the shoulder and destructive and anterior forces on the elbow. In the throwing motion, compressive force and horizontal adduction on torque were mainly exerted at the shoulder joint, while anterior force and flexion torque were mainly exerted at the elbow joint. Next is, what do movement scientists mean when they say that relative timing is an invariant feature of the generalized motor program? What implications does this have for performers who practice their movements at different speeds? For example, is dancers, jugglers, rhythmic gymnasts, drummers. According to movement scientists, a generalized motor program is thought to develop over practice and provides the basis for generating movement sequence within a class of movements that show the same invariant features such as sequence order, relative timing, and relative force. When they say that relative timing is invariant feature of generalized motor program, it means that relative timing is unchanged feature of the class of movements. Because, for example, when a movement situation requires a learned sequence to be produced, thus the relative times used to produce the elements in the sequence remain unchanged, but the absolute times is rescaled to meet the specific demands. Changing the absolute timing parameter results in slower movements that could be considered stretch of copies of faster movement. In this example, we see that relative timing doesn't affect the results of a movement, but the actual timing maintains unchanged or invariant. Performers like dancers, jugglers, rhythmic gymnasts, and drummers practice their movements at different speed to perform and correct their movements at the right timing. They need to change the speed to be able to determine the error in their movements to make their performance perfect, because if they do not practice their movements at different speeds, the outcome of their performance would be poor. Next question is, under what conditions are a performer's movement more especially accurate as the person decreases his or her movement time? What implications might this have for an elementary physical education instructor who is teaching children how to throw or kick a ball toward the target? When a performer movements more especially accurate as the person decreases his or her movement time, it is under the condition of relative timing, which changing the absolute timing parameter results in slower movement, and the absolute time is rescaled to meet the specific demands, because when a performer perform his or her movements in a slow way, the results will be more accurate. This invariant feature, which is relative timing, would be very helpful for the elementary physical education instructor to teach his or her students how to throw or kick a ball toward the target, because when teaching this task, we need to perform this in different speed for our student to be able for them to study the movements very well, because they will have a time to process in their mind of how to execute these movements. They will have a time to think and decide how to execute these movements, because children can pick up easily when we give our instruction in a slow way. Last question is, explain how an error in a low-level central nervous system process might cause a player throwing darts to miss the target area she is aiming for. An error that will encounter by a player of throwing darts that is a low level of central nervous system process that cause for her to miss the target area she is aiming for is that the difficulty to process the command in his mind, because we all know that the central nervous system is control most function of the body and mind. Performing the throwing task in the virtual environment activate more areas of multisensory integration. A big component of throw comes from the contribution from both autonomic and central nervous system. In short, the CNS consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and motor neurons sending response to. And from the brain to the muscles, this is responsible for executing throw move pass in terms of throwing darts, generating to rotational velocity starts with speed. Speed starts by speeding up the nervous system. Therefore, a person with low levels of central nervous system process can be a big barrier to her to aim the target that she want to aim because of a low process of the message and a low response with it to execute movement more accurate.